Looks like we have over 100 participants logged on so far, and we've got a lot to share with you. So I think I'll kick us off. My name is Bill Allen. I've had the humble honor of being your president and CEO of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation for the last 17 years. I'm retiring at the end of December. In a minute, I'll be introducing my successor, Stephen Chung, to participate in this economic webinar with you all. But it's one of the central foundational elements of the LAEDC is research, so that we all better understand this regional economy that we share together and contribute so much to. We've been doing this research work for more than 25 years at the LAEDC, but I'm honored to have spent the last 14 of them working with Shannon Sedgwick, who's been our director in recent years of the Institute for Applied Economics, and will be presenting to you today, as she has fairly regularly since the inception of the pandemic way back in March of 2020, when we lost 785,000 jobs in this county, saw thousands of businesses close, saw our economy contract, and a lot of pain we all shared. We're continuing to make great progress recovering from the pandemic. Shannon will share with you, have returned our unemployment numbers down below 5% for the first time since the pandemic began. A year ago, it was about 7.5%. At the depths of the pandemic, it exceeded 20% unemployment. So it's good news. And we got some more good news, and that is that California is about to overtake Germany as the fourth largest economy in the world. We already surpassed Brazil and France a few years ago, the United Kingdom a couple of years ago. We've been in fifth place among nations of the world. And the data is indicating by our growth and the recent decline in the German economy that we will soon, this year or next, become the fourth largest economy in the world. And I point out that we have a population of 40 million. Germany has a very productive population of over 83 million. And we're about to surpass them in world rankings. So we have a lot of good news here in the state, but we have a lot of our neighbors still struggling. We have over 100,000 of our neighbors who've not yet recovered their jobs that were lost in the pandemic. And these are the sorts of reasons that we provide these webinars to you, so that you all who do so much to contribute to this economy and contribute to our communities are armed with the information you need to make the informed decisions that are necessary to direct resources where they're most needed in our region, whether they're most needed to help our neighbors recover, or whether they're most needed to help enable the further growth and reinvention of our regional economy. So thank you again for being with us. And thank you for being with us as partners in the work we all did together to help our small businesses and to help our neighbors get through this pandemic from an economic standpoint, and even with the Safer at Work efforts we made together to keep people safe in the workplace. The work continues. It will continue under my colleague, Stephen Chung. Stephen has been the head of our World Trade Center in LA for the past 7 years. He's been the chief operating officer of the LAEDC, and he recently was one of the leaders of an extraordinary effort in our region that is called the Community Economic Resilience Fund, a statewide program of $600 million to be invested in California's regions, planning grants of $5 million to each region that applied, to help do further deep dive analysis of these regions, bring voices together that have not historically been at the table when regional economic development planning has taken place, and empower them all with that data and that space to convene and collaborate in the development of a plan that is truly inclusive and helps with a just transition to a carbon neutral economy. And he'll be leading that team forward, as the LAEDC was announced last Thursday by the state of California as the regional convener for this work that'll take place over the next couple of years. So I'd like to introduce you to my successor as CEO of the LAEDC, taking over in January, and as the head of our regional convening, facilitating role for so many partners in this region in the SURF process. Please welcome my colleague, Stephen Chung. Stephen?
Thank you so much, Bill. And thank you for your amazing leadership of LAEDC over the last 17 years. As our economy continues to evolve in this entire region, we need strong steward leaders like yourself to basically be able to carry our region through. And I'm so honored for the opportunity to continue to work with our community to make sure that we're able to get through the next phase as well. As we're speaking about that, LADC continues to focus on our core set of work, including our economic research, where you'll hear about a bit more from Shannon Sedgwick, our industry cluster development, our business assistance, our workforce development, international trade work as well. Combined together with these core work, we're able to move forward the economy to make sure we're able to recover equitably, sustainably, and build a more resilient future for our economy. And specifically, I want to highlight two important programs that are currently underway. One, Bill already mentioned in terms of the SURF, and I'll go into a bit later. But also, LADC recently officially launched Gladio LA, which is a virtual platform designed to close a few of the gaps job seekers experience when they're beginning their careers or redirecting to a new career path. And so Gladio LA, it's a personalized, self-directed virtual career navigation platform that will empower Angelenos to make informed decisions about their upskilling, reskilling, and personal career paths. This is so important right now as we're looking and transitioning the future of the economy. Where are those job opportunities? How do people get into those roles, whether they're new to the job market or whether they are dislocated workers are looking for a new career path? So I always put in the chat the link directly to Gladio LA, which is losangeles.gladio.org. Second, I want to highlight what Bill was also mentioning, the California Community Economic Resilience Fund, SURF. This is going to be so important for our region as we're looking for a resilient path for recovery. And that $600 million dedicated by the state is going to be very helpful for throughout the entire state, but especially for our region where we have suffered so much during COVID. And that's why we want to make sure that this engagement process is going to be with you, with all of you. I'll also put in the chat a link directly to our site, ladc.org/surf, where you can get involved, because this is a community-based engagement process that needs your voice. Over the next 2 years, we're going to be working very closely as the convener to bring together the various communities throughout Los Angeles so that we can have a strategic plan going forward in terms of what these job opportunities, industry cluster development opportunities will be like. But we can't do this without you. So LADC, we're honored and delighted that we're able to serve side by side with the California Community Foundation as your regional convener and as your fiscal agent to be able to really bring forth this change. So looking forward to working very closely with you in the upcoming months and years. And now I'd like to introduce Shannon Sedgwick, the director of LAEDC's Institute for Applied Economics. Shannon?
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for LADC's quarterly economic briefing. I hope all of you have been well since our last webinar. Today, I'm going to go over the latest local area employment situation for LA County to share where we stood as of September. But first, I'm going to jump into just a brief overview, economic overview for you. So inflationary headwinds, they continue. Prices are measured by the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, and that's how we track inflation. The CPI measures the average change over time in prices paid by an urban consumer for a market basket of consumer goods and services. So prices in Los Angeles were up by 0.5% in September over the prior month, and over the last 12 months, the CPI was up by 7.8%. So year over year, food prices increased by nearly 10%, and they increased by 9.7%, and energy prices jumped 22%, still related to the high price of gasoline. And the index for all items excluding food and energy, that increased by 6.3% over the year. If we look at changes in CPI data by the three main components of food, housing, and energy in 6-month intervals, we see just how much energy prices are leading inflation and how volatile they are. And we see that volatility directly looking at crude oil spot prices. So both West Texas Intermediate and the Brent spot price took a large fall in the month of September of 2022. That means we're approaching October with the lowest prices since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, prices in October are expected to be higher when the month concludes. And this is related to OPEC agreeing to cut production by about 100,000 barrels a day in September, and any other disruptions related to weather and the war puts upward pressure on prices as well. In addition to inflation, global supply chain issues caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and intensified by the Russian invasion of Ukraine they've been another major contributor to the rise of inflation. The Global Supply Chain Pressure Index, it tracks the state of global supply chains by combining variables from several indices in transportation and in manufacturing, such as those related to delivery times, prices, and inventory. So the New York Fed's Global Supply Chain Pressure Index has shown pressures easing for 5 straight months now, to a level not seen since January of 2020, which was right before the pandemic hit. This year, the Federal Reserve embarked on an ambitious plan to control inflation. The Reserve has raised the federal rate 5 times this year, and it's likely that the Federal Reserve will raise it once again at their next meeting. Since March of 2022, the monthly average effective federal fund rate, it's risen from less than 0.1% to nearly 3.1%. And higher interest rates, they're expected to lead to slower economic growth and softer labor market conditions, which will serve to combat inflation, but may also bring some pain to households and businesses as a result. At the national level, we've seen 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product growth, GDP growth, which is a general definition of a recession. However, the National Bureau of Economic Research has not declared one. And this is because 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth is not the only way they determine a recession. And there's a strong labor market and strong corporate earnings growth that we are seeing, and those are both atypical of recessions. So continued above average inflation with a general uncertainty about the future of the economy will continue to put downward pressure on consumer sentiment and consumer spending. The local area data release covering the month of September was released last Friday, and we'll go over the employment situation for Los Angeles County next. First, let's look at monthly total employment in LA County since January of 2000. As we have been sharing, job loss associated with the measures to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 were unprecedented, shedding close to 800,000 payroll jobs in just 2 months' time between March and April. Between September of 2021 and September of 2022, non-farm employment increased by over 186,000 jobs, or 4.3%. However, compared to September of 2019, pre-pandemic, non-farm employment is still down by over 11,000 jobs, roughly 0.3%. Here we have the monthly unemployment rate in Los Angeles County. In September, the unemployment rate was 8.2%. And September's unemployment rate is down. Oh, that is not the right chart. I'm so sorry. So this shows a monthly change in jobs from month to month over from prior to the pandemic of February 2020 through September. So we can see that over time there's been jobs added at a modest rate. And as of September, we are now of the jobs lost within March and April, we have recovered 91% of those jobs back to payrolls. Here we go. Here we have the monthly unemployment rate in Los Angeles County. And in September, we see that that rate is 4.5%. So September's unemployment rate is down by 5 percentage points from last year. We're still operating during a recovery. And so we see that we're slowly inching closer to normal. So we're less than 1% difference from where we were in September of 2019 pre-pandemic. Here we have month-to-month changes of payroll employment by industry sector. And we can see that education really leads the way in terms of jobs added over the month. This was and also government, which is predominantly education jobs adding back to the payrolls too, with back to school. We see that retail sales and manufacturing are some of the industries that have lost jobs over the month in small numbers. Here we see a year-over-year change in payroll employment broken out by industry. We can see that almost all industries have shown growth. This is because if you remember back to September of 2021, we were still in the process of recovery. And so employment levels were still depressed. And so, of course, this is showing that we're continuing to recover and adding more payrolls over that period. But we want to take a moment to look at what today's numbers mean in terms of our recovery and where we were at, and do a comparison of where we were at pre-pandemic. So you can see that if we compare September's numbers of this year with September's numbers of 2019, that we see healthcare and social assistance has grown above and beyond its pre-pandemic baseline. Professional and business services have also added a significant number of jobs over their pre-pandemic levels. Transportation and warehousing and utilities has added jobs to their payrolls. And our motion picture and sound recording industry, which was one of the hardest hit industries during the pandemic due to the suspension of production in 2020, they have added a significant number of jobs in their industry as well. If we're looking at those industries that have yet to recover to their pre-pandemic levels, we see that food services and dining places are still down by over 24,000 jobs. Manufacturing are down by more than 20,000 jobs, and government is still down by over 17,000 jobs. So those are the industries that have yet to recover in red, and those that are in blue are those that have exceeded their pre-pandemic level. We look at job postings data as an indicator of real-time employer demand. So if we track their total levels, we can get a feel or an indication of what's going to be happening in the job market to come. So the past 2 months, we've seen a slowing on the growth in job postings with the lowest levels that were seen in 2021. By industry, again, we see healthcare and social assistance leading, making up close to a quarter of the postings. And so among those top industries in terms of job postings, healthcare and social assistance, they've grown the most this year, followed by professional, scientific, and technical services, which have fallen off recently. We're starting to see their employment opportunities dry up a little bit. Next, we're going to move along to a couple of updates on some key industries to give a little context to what our employment numbers are saying. Okay. So trade and logistics is a key industry here in Los Angeles County and throughout Southern California. due to the large volume of goods that are moved to serve our local market and move through our region. Monthly TEUs, we show that in September, the level of TEUs started to soften a little bit. And we've seen a couple of months here now that have shown softening throughput. But when you look at what's happening on an annual basis, you see that 2021 was a banner year. So while month-to-month data obscures a little bit of just how much we were moving through the ports, especially as we were talking about increased consumption of goods over services through the pandemic, it really does show up in the ports TEUs figures for 2021. If you look to the left, you can see that normally the movement of goods through the ports are cyclical. But because of some issues with supply chain, we're seeing retailers and producers basically almost continual levels of TEUs coming through. And as it's softening lately, what that's telling us is that inventory levels are at a high level and that most retailers are already prepared for the holiday season in anticipation of, or in a way, as a way of avoiding some of the issues that may exist with supply chain problems. Tourism is a huge industry here in Los Angeles County. And I mentioned before that many of our tourism-based industries are still those that are suffering a bit, that aren't back to their levels and aren't surpassing their pre-pandemic levels. And so one of the ways that we can look at this is looking at the number of people who are moving through LAX, both from other parts of the US and from abroad. So to the right, you can see that if you're comparing August from 2019 to 2020 to 2021 and 22, both domestic and international passengers are still low compared to pre-pandemic levels. So they are recovering, they are adding, there's more people moving through our airport into our region, but we still haven't rebounded fully. And you can see that to the left, that shows the actual total level of passengers coming through LAX from January of 2019 to current data of August. Food services. So we've continually identified this as being an industry that has really been struggling in the region. We took a look at open table reservations. And this figure here is showing a comparison of reservations placed for the same period in 2019. So the 2020 figures are compared to 2019, 2021 figures are compared to 2019, and 2022 figures are compared to 19. And so you're really seeing that the change that occurred with people and their behaviors of going out to eat have not rebounded fully. And there's a couple of factors coming into play. One is people are, they just haven't resumed their pre-pandemic behaviors fully. The other is as inflation is impacting households and now these necessities are more expensive, they're scaling back on their discretionary income. And another factor is as we are still working remote and schedules, our work schedules are hybrid schedules, it's reducing the number of people who are going out to lunch, going out to dinner, going out to happy hours. So it's still showing that impact. So there's three things that are really at play here. The motion picture industry, one of our iconic industries here in the region. As I mentioned, we were experiencing extremely high levels of film production, film and television production during 2021. And that shows here in shoot days. So you can see during the pandemic when everything was shut down in Q2 of 2020, there was virtually zero production. And as the industry learned to adapt, and moved through into 2021, we ended up having a banner year in terms of films and television shows being filmed and produced. And so what you're seeing now in the most recent quarters is kind of a leveling off and a return to the level of shoot days that were more normal, like what we saw prior to the pandemic. October is manufacturing month, and so we wanted to take a minute to share some stats about manufacturing. Manufacturing is an industry where it's very well publicized that it's been on a long-term sectoral decline in terms of jobs. But we thought it was important to do a comparison to look at output associated with the industry and to see that while employment might be declining over time, that same trend is not true when you're looking at the revenues associated with that industry and its contribution to the economy here locally. And so the manufacturing industry, the sector, it contributes about 8% of GDP here locally. And with an increasing ratio of output to labor, which is related to capital investment and advances in technology like automation, manufacturing here in LA County has the 5th highest productivity among all LA County industries as of 2020. And since it's Halloween, which is one of my favorite holidays, our treat for you today is a little bit of Halloween themed data. So we are sharing that in 2022, roughly 4,000 people work here in Los Angeles County producing and distributing confectionery candies and chocolate. So that includes the production, it includes wholesale distribution, and it includes confectionery and nut retailers. So those are stores specializing in that. So 50% of all workers producing and distributing candy in these industries are in wholesale. And the remaining are split between manufacturing and retail. So every time that you purchase a bag of candy to hand out to trick-or-treaters, just know that you're doing your part in supporting the 4,000 workers that work in these industries here in Los Angeles.
All right, thank you so much, Shannon, for that wonderful presentation and the briefing for us. Now we are going to be transitioning into some panel Q&A. So if I can ask both Stephen and Bill to join us back on screen. And to everybody in the audience, the virtual audience today, if you can please submit your questions via the Q&A function, or you can just place it in the chat and we'll pull it out from there. And we encourage you to ask questions throughout, and any questions we don't get to, we'll make sure to follow up with you separately offline. So with that, Shannon, you pretty much answered this during your presentation, but to go back to it and to kind of have a clear understanding for everybody, I think the biggest question that most people always have right now is, are we in a recession? And so Shannon, if you'd like to kick us off.
Sure. So, we get this question a lot because we have seen that the data has come out and there's been 2 consecutive quarters of GDP decline. And so that is a general rule of thumb that indicates a recession. But true to COVID-19 form, we're not seeing the economy behave in the same ways that it normally does. And so we have a strong labor market right now. So the demand for jobs is still relatively high. Unemployment is low. And we're seeing that positive corporate earnings, which again, in a typical recession, you see a drop in employment, and you see a slowing of corporate earnings, right? So none of those two things are happening. Also, the folks that the powers that be in terms of this in BER that actually announce whether and decide and announce whether it's a recession, typically wait for the revisions to come in, and they factor in these other elements. It's not just GDP. So that while that's an indicator, it's not the sole metric used to decide or declare.
Thank you, Shannon. And Bill and Stephen, please also feel free to chime in if you'd like to on that question. Otherwise, we'll go into the next one. Stephen, I'll direct this towards you. And we have a couple more specific questions. I think that relates to this, but we'll start with the broader one of in regards to geopolitical tension. Do we expect that geopolitical tension to affect our local economy?
Definitely. I think we need to pay more attention to the international situations that are happening. Obviously, with the war in Ukraine, we saw the direct impact it had on our stock market, as well as Shannon was mentioning before, the energy costs continue to increase and fluctuate. And partially it's because of the global supply chain and how wars and other conflict can potentially be of impact. I do think that we also need to watch very carefully what's happening in the UK. I think during COVID, a lot of times we have a tendency to look inward and just look at our local economy, not realizing, for example, when Brexit happened, that did have a direct impact on our local economy as well. And as they're getting ready for their new prime minister, it'll be very interesting to see how that's going to affect us. Lastly, I do want to also flag what's been happening around the Asian countries right now, especially the tension between North and South Korea currently. It can have a potential impact on our shipping lane and our supply chain as well, because we do have such a huge volume of trade coming directly from Korea. And as we're talking about Asia, it's also worth noting that currently the Chinese government, they're going through their process of electing their president for the third time, which will have major global implication as China is one of our top trading partners and foreign investor as well. So those are things to definitely watch out for. I think as we're moving forward, we would definitely be missing a big piece of the equation if we're only looking at the local economy and not looking at how the international market will impact us.
Excellent. You answered the two specific questions that we had right in there. So that's perfect. Bill, the next question I'd like to have go to you. And then I think both Shannon and Stephen, you all can chime in as well. But a great question that was put out there by the audience. Is there a period of time in recent history where the same combination of factors, inflation, supply chain, behavior chain, and strong job growth have been present at the same time?
In recent history, not to my knowledge. Shannon would be the better expert on that, but we've not had this level of inflation since the early 80s. And I'm not sure even then all of these factors were in play. To have a pandemic change the nature of our behavior as significantly as it has, combined with a war in Ukraine and pandemic-related impacts on the supply chain added to the inflation, much of which is a result of our government's desire to help us avoid a terrible recession and to avoid the permanent loss of certain companies and industries and jobs. We pumped so much money into the system that it contributed to inflation, as did the supply chains disruptions, as did behavior changes. So I'm not aware, certainly in recent history, of this confluence of events existing. Shannon?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo that sentiment, even in my last comment about whether we were in a recession or not. This is not typical of the cause of the pandemic. Wasn't something that happens frequently. The measures we took to control the spread isn't something that has a precedence. And the economy's reaction to it is unprecedented. And so a lot of the impact of what we saw in terms of businesses struggling and jobs lost was really because people changed their behavior so much due to these health orders and restrictions. And the duration of these measures in one form or another were so long that that's impacted the way that people behave now. And then coupled with inflation, that impacts spending again. In the past, when you're looking at a recession, you see employment declines, you see growth slow, you see businesses operating close to the chest in terms of being very careful in how they expand or how they add to payrolls to make sure that they can weather the recession. In the past, when we've had periods of high inflation, again, it was related to slowdowns. So this is a bit anomalous, really. COVID continues to make it very difficult to forecast. And so even the Fed is struggling with finding, treading carefully enough to try to manage inflation without spinning us off into a recession by being too strong. So it is a difficult and very unprecedented time for all of this type of data that we're seeing.
And before we go on to the next question, Stephen, I'm going to direct it towards you. Just to let the audience know, because I've seen a couple questions come in, we will be sharing a recording of today's webinar later in the week, as well as a PDF of the slides, so you have some of that information at hand. So Stephen, next question to you, coming in from the audience. As a small business owner, we have not recovered from the impact of COVID-19 and feel past overdue to the overall economic strength due to the performance of large public corporations. We are further impacted by the tight labor market and having to compete with large corporations for talent. What is being done to help small businesses?
That's a really good question. We've seen during COVID, actually Shannon did a report with the LA County government called the Pathways to Economic Resiliency. In that report, we found that 92 to 94% of all LA County companies have less than 20 employees. We know that we have a significant amount of small businesses that were negatively impacted because of COVID. And some of them are restricted in terms of their ability to access some of the resources. So throughout this entire period, LAEDC has created a number of different programs, including the Community Connectory, Together for LA, Together for South LA, a number of different projects and programs that were in partnership with various partners throughout the entire region to provide assistance to small businesses. As we're moving forward, that's still not enough. We know that, for example, the Department of Economic Opportunity at the county level and also throughout the 88 different cities, many of their governments are also creating programs individually to support small businesses. So I'd highly recommend this person that I see that's anonymous to look at not only our resource with LAEDC's website, but also reach out to the county and or specific city that you're living in for additional resources. I think there's going to be more opportunities and funding opportunities that's going to be coming down from the state and federal government that can supply this, but this needs to be communicated directly to our governmental partners so they can be additional resources dedicated to supporting the recovery of small businesses.
I would just add on the tight labor market question, we have a partnership with all of our community colleges in LA County. There's a lot of middle skill jobs that our community colleges do a tremendous job in training people for. This includes helping incumbent workers upskill. It helps people with transitions from a sector that may be in decline to sectors that are increasing. So I would encourage any small employers to contact us and also contact their community colleges and workforce centers to find skilled candidates who may not be applying in the traditional ways for posted positions. There is an abundant talent pool here in LA County, over 5 million people in our labor force. And there are some undiscovered talents that we would encourage our small business partners to contact us for, and maybe we can connect you to talent pool sources that can help fill some of your needs.
Thank you both, Stephen and Bill. Next question we have, and we have about 4 minutes left, so probably enough time for 2, maybe 3 questions to come in. But Shannon, this one I'd like to, I think, direct towards you. You showed a lot of data on the supply side, but could you please elaborate on the demand consumer side? Any consumer patterns that might drive up inflation, or any insights on government policies that might have inflationary effects by expanding the aggregated demand? Oh, Shannon, you're on mute.
About that. So we are seeing that, remember, one of the big contributors to inflation initially was the shift in consumption, a diversion of funds to purchasing goods instead of services and activities throughout the pandemic. So we were consuming a tremendous amount of goods. That massive amount of demand, coupled with global supply chain disruptions related to COVID prior to the war, and then exacerbated by the war in the Ukraine. That's kind of how we landed here. And energy prices spiking up again post-pandemic, leading inflation, at least the CPI here locally and in the US. That's a major contributor too. So those are all the things that kind of brought us here. In terms of consumption, you are seeing that inflation is starting to affect the amount being spent and the purchases being made. So as your food, your housing, your gasoline, as all of these necessities in your household become more expensive, you again shift your purchasing and your behavior and your spending patterns. So you're moving away from discretionary purchases. So your retail declines, those are likely due to people being a little more conservative in their spending because prices are high. They're not sure if there's a recession coming, and they just have to make different choices. And so that's what we're seeing there. In terms of inflationary effects, part of the main contributor to that kind of gluttonous demand for goods was related to all of the stimulus packages that were being put out. So you had households with more income than they were used to having, and that kind of led into it. And as those have ended, you've seen spending scale back. You're seeing spending scale back again because of inflation. There are still monies that are being injected into the economy related to programs that were passed and put into effect during the pandemic that have a lead time. So they're now coming into play. Whether they're going to have an inflationary effect kind of remains to be seen. We do know that they're, especially in the terms of infrastructure in construction, that there are some supply issues still that exist in those supply chains that are making prices higher. And so they're facing inflation on projects, and they're adapting their behavior to account for unplanned price increases. So shorter periods, if they're costing out a job, it's only good for this amount of time, and that's it. It's not good for your 90 days, your 6 months. You're really kind of looking at 30 days and less in some of these pricings because of the volatility that they're seeing in the goods that are required in their industry. And so as the infrastructure bills happen, we'll see if that leads to any kind of pressure and inflation or not.
Thank you, Shannon. And before we pass it off to Stephen to close us out, any final words, Shannon or Bill?
I just noticed one quick question on manufacturing. I just want to say, I do think the trend may continue to decline in employment, which is unfortunate because they are among the best paying jobs in our region. And anything we can do as a region collectively to encourage reshoring of manufacturing into this county, which is still the largest concentration of manufacturing jobs of any county in the country, would be well worth our collective effort. I do expect to see continued productivity improvements so that the output will likely continue to increase. We have a lot of highly skilled advanced manufacturing that goes on here, but it's incredibly competitive. And any place in the world that can make something as well as we can make it for less dollars could steal away a piece of our share of the global manufacturing market. So a really important area as I retire and look to all of you in our audience, as well as my colleagues today, to think about how we continue to support our manufacturing industry, reshore some of the manufacturing that was lost in the globalization of manufacturing in recent decades, is important to the economic growth, health, well-being of the region, again, because of the incredible wages the premiums above our average county wage. So I appreciated that person's question. Just wanted to answer it quickly.
And I can do another really quick one. So one of the questions is in terms of job outlook, what are recommendations and insight for recent graduates? What we're seeing and how can folks graduating during these times be encouraged to prepare and what to look for? So throughout the pandemic and even prior to the pandemic, we saw healthcare employment in the healthcare industry is really growing. And that's because our population was aging, and that hasn't changed. And so if you're looking for a job that gives you flexibility in terms of where you want to live, if you're looking for a job that's traditionally got higher than average wages, and if you're looking for a job that has options in lower and middle and upper skill, healthcare is a good option. We also know that California is a leader in terms of sustainability. And so looking at tech jobs and getting involved with clean energy is always a good bet too. And so those provide another option that we see going to be stable, even as the threats of a recession come to play. Tech industries might not be growing at the rates that we've seen in the past, but likely anything having to do with sustainability, the green economy, the blue economy, those will be relatively stable and show some growth, also because of the investments being made by government.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Bill, both. With that, we're going to pass this on over to Stephen to help close us out.
Great, thanks so much. I'll just add one more thought to that. I agree with Shannon completely. As we're looking at Richard's question about energy costs as well, what's been done about it is there's going to be more investment looking at the federal and state investment as well. That's going to likely come to the Southern California region because of the work that we've already done for sustainability. So I think that's going to help with the energy costs, but at the same time create job opportunities for the future. And with that, I just want to thank you all so much for joining us today for a lively and thoughtful conversation, for a look at the current status of Los Angeles County and our regional economy. I also want to encourage you to save the date for LAEDC's economic forecast on February 23rd and next year. And so my screen just went away. Give me a second. This economic forecast will provide even more in-depth analysis of our regional economy, but will also provide insights into California and the U.S. economy. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you soon. And meanwhile, please do engage with us with your various questions that you have. You can find more information on our website with LAEDC.org, and we again encourage you to participate in the SURF process so that we can collectively recover from the pandemic, but at the same time look forward to a brighter future together. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Happy Halloween.